Lisa Carter had been staring at the same patrol reports for 3 hours. The coffee in her cup had gone cold, and the endless stream of routine data was making her eyes heavy. She commanded the most advanced surveillance station in the Zephyrian Empire, but most days felt like she was watching an empty sky. Nothing ever happened on the outer rim. Nothing interesting anyway. The station floated in the darkness between stars, its crystal arrays reaching out like the arms of some great metal spider. For 200 years, it had watched the borders of the Empire. Ships came and went, following the same routes they had used for generations. Pirates sometimes tried to sneak past, but the station's sensors could spot a grain of sand from 1,000,000 miles away. Today felt like every other day until Lieutenant Jake Morrison called out from his station. "Commander Carter, I'm seeing something strange out here." Lisa looked up from her reports. Jake was young, maybe 25, with the kind of excitement that came from actually wanting to be on the frontier. Most officers saw border duty as punishment, but Jake treated every shift like he might discover something amazing. "What kind of strange, Lieutenant?" Jake's fingers danced across his control panel. The main screen shifted to show a sector of space that should have been empty. "There's a ship out there, but it's not in any of our databases. The computer can't identify it at all." Lisa stood up and walked to Jake's station. She had been doing this job for 15 years, and she had never seen a ship that wasn't in their database. The Empire had records of every vessel that had ever been built by every known race in the galaxy. Pirates used stolen ships, traders used old ships, but they were all ships that somebody had built somewhere. "Show me," she said. The image on the screen made Lisa's breath catch in her throat. The ship was unlike anything she had ever seen. Where Zephyrian vessels were smooth and beautiful, made of living crystal that caught starlight like jewels, this ship looked like it had been hammered together from scrap metal. It was gray and angular, with hard edges and no curves. Strange symbols were painted on its hull in white letters that meant nothing to her. "How big is it?" Lisa asked. "About the size of a heavy cruiser, but the mass readings are all wrong. It's too light for its size, but the energy signature says it should be much heavier." Lisa studied the ship more carefully. It was moving slowly through their space, but not like a ship that was lost or exploring. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and what it was looking for. "Is it scanning us?" she asked. Jake checked his instruments. His face went pale. "Yes, ma'am. It's running deep scans on all of our defensive positions. It's mapping our weapon systems, our communication arrays, everything." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. No one scanned Imperial military installations. No one was that stupid or that brave. "Hail them," she ordered. Jake tried every communication frequency they had. The ship ignored them completely. It just kept scanning, methodically examining every piece of equipment on the station. "Get me Admiral Brooks," Lisa said. "Right now." While Jake placed the call, Lisa watched the unknown ship. It had moved closer to the station, close enough that she could see details on its hull. The metal looked old but well-maintained. There were no signs of battle damage, no indication that this was some kind of pirate vessel. But there were things that didn't make sense. The ship had what looked like weapon ports, but they were in the wrong places. There were structures that might have been sensors, but they were too big and too crude. Admiral Henry Brooks appeared on the communication screen. He was an older man with gray hair and the kind of calm that came from 40 years of military service. He had been asleep, but he was alert now. "Commander Carter, what's the situation?" "Sir, we have an unidentified vessel in our space. It's conducting detailed scans of our defensive positions, and it's not responding to our hails." Brooks studied the image of the ship. Lisa could see the confusion in his eyes. "I've never seen anything like this. What do our records show?" "Nothing, sir. There's no match in any database. The design doesn't match any known shipbuilding techniques. It's like it came from somewhere completely different." Brooks was quiet for a moment. "Have you tried to intercept it?" "Not yet, sir. I wanted your authorization first." "Send 3 interceptors. Don't engage unless they fire first, but I want to know what we're dealing with." Lisa gave the order. 3 Zephyrian interceptors launched from the station's fighter bay. They were Fast, beautiful ships that moved like living things through space. Their crystal hulls sparkled as they accelerated toward the unknown vessel. The interceptors were halfway to their target when something impossible happened. The unknown ship simply vanished. One moment it was there, solid and real on their screens. The next moment there was nothing but empty space. What happened? Brooks demanded. Jake was frantically checking his instruments. I don't know, sir. It just disappeared. No energy discharge, no hyperspace signature, no trace radiation. It's like it was never there. Lisa stared at the empty space where the ship had been. Bring the interceptors back, she said quietly. As the fighters returned to the station, Lisa tried to make sense of what she had seen. The ship had been there. It had been scanning their defenses with equipment that shouldn't have existed, and then it had vanished using technology that was beyond anything in their databases. Commander, Brooks said, I want a full report on my desk in 1 hour. Include every detail, every sensor reading, every piece of data you have. Yes, sir. The communication ended, leaving Lisa alone with her thoughts and her fears. She looked out at the stars, wondering what else might be out there, watching them from the darkness. The Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They were the strongest, the most advanced, the most powerful civilization anyone had ever known. But now, for the first time in her life, Lisa Carter wondered if that was really true. The unknown ship had treated their borders like they didn't exist. It had scanned their most secret military installations like it had every right to do so. And then it had disappeared using technology that made their best scientists look like children playing with toys. Jake was still at his station, running diagnostic after diagnostic, trying to find some trace of the ship that had been there. Commander, he said without looking up. What if it comes back? Lisa didn't answer. She was thinking about the way the ship had moved, the way it had ignored their hails, the way it had vanished. There had been something in that behavior that reminded her of the way a scientist might study insects under a microscope. Clinical, detached, completely without fear. She walked back to her command chair and sat down heavily. The patrol reports were still there, waiting for her attention, but they seemed pointless now. How could she care about routine shipping schedules and minor trade disputes when something like that ship was out there in the darkness? The Empire had always been safe because they were stronger than everyone else. But what happened when you met someone who was stronger than you? What happened when you realized that all your power and all your technology meant nothing to someone who could appear and disappear at will? Lisa Carter had spent her entire career protecting the Empire's borders, but as she sat in her command chair, staring out at the empty space where the impossible ship had been, she wondered if the borders had ever really existed at all. Maybe they had just been lucky that no one had cared enough to test them, until now. Dr. Patricia Hayes had been sleeping when the call came in. She was used to late-night calls, but this one was different. The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus Stone, the Empire's intelligence director, and he sounded worried. In 30 years of knowing Marcus, Patricia had never heard him sound worried about anything. Patricia, I need you at Central Command immediately. We have a situation that requires your expertise. She dressed quickly and took the fastest transport to the capital. The Imperial Central Command building was always busy, but tonight it felt different. There were more guards than usual, and everyone she passed looked tense. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to make the Empire's leadership nervous. Marcus met her at the security checkpoint. He was a tall man with dark hair and the kind of face that never showed what he was thinking. Tonight, though, his usually calm expression had cracks in it. What's going on, Marcus? Patricia asked as they walked through the corridors. 3 hours ago, one of our border stations detected an unidentified vessel. The ship scanned our defensive positions and then vanished without a trace. We need to know what we're dealing with. Patricia had spent most of her career studying alien artifacts and lost civilizations. She had seen technology from dozens of different species, each with their own approach to science and engineering. But when Marcus showed her the data from the border station, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's climate control. The ship was wrong in ways that were hard to describe. Every known civilization in the galaxy had developed from the same basic technological foundation. They all used quantum crystals for power, bio-neural networks for computation, and gravity manipulation for propulsion. The differences were in the details, not the fundamentals. This ship used none of those technologies. The energy readings don't make sense, Patricia said, studying the data on Marcus's screen. They're using some kind of fusion system, but it's arranged in a way that shouldn't work. It's too crude, too simple. But it does work, Marcus pointed out. The ship was there, it was functional, and it was scanning our installations. Patricia nodded, but her mind was racing. She pulled up the metallurgy reports from the sensor data. The ship's hull was made of iron and other common elements, but they were arranged in patterns that she had never seen before. It was like someone had taken the most basic materials in the universe and found a completely different way to use them. Marcus, I need to see Captain Davis. If this is a first contact situation, he needs to be involved. Captain Roy Davis ran the Empire's first contact protocols. He was responsible for managing encounters with new species and ensuring that initial meetings went smoothly. When Patricia and Marcus found him, he was already studying the same data, but his expression was troubled. I've been looking at this for 2 hours, Roy said without looking up from his desk. This doesn't fit any of our first contact scenarios. Unknown species usually make mistakes when they enter our space. They get lost, they send distress signals, they try to communicate. This ship did none of those things. Patricia sat down across from Roy's desk. What did it do? It conducted a military reconnaissance mission. It scanned our defensive positions, mapped our weapon systems, and analyzed our communication networks. Then it disappeared before we could respond. That's not the behavior of a lost explorer or a peaceful trader. Marcus leaned against the wall. So we're dealing with a potential threat. Maybe, Roy said. But there's something else that bothers me. The ship's approach was too methodical, too professional. This wasn't random exploration. Someone sent that ship to gather specific information about our defenses. Patricia felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. Roy, what if this species developed completely independently from the rest of us? Roy looked up from his data. What do you mean? Every known civilization in the galaxy shares common technological roots. We all learned from the same ancient sources, we all built on the same foundations. But what if somewhere out there, a species developed without any of that shared knowledge? Marcus pushed himself away from the wall. That would make them completely unpredictable. Exactly, Patricia said. We understand other species because we understand their technology. We know how they think because we think the same way. But if this species developed along completely different lines, she didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. The Empire's entire approach to dealing with other species was based on shared assumptions about how technology worked and how civilizations developed. If those assumptions were wrong, then everything they thought they knew about interstellar relations was useless. Roy pulled up another screen. I've been analyzing the ship's movement patterns. Look at this. The screen showed the path the unknown ship had taken through their space. It had approached from a direction that avoided most of their sensor networks. It had positioned itself to scan multiple installations simultaneously, and it had maintained an escape route at all times. This is military-grade tactical planning, Roy said. Whoever sent this ship knows how to conduct reconnaissance missions. They understand operational security. They're not amateurs. Patricia studied the movement patterns. How long do you think they were planning this? Months, maybe years. They would have needed time to map our patrol routes and identify our blind spots. This level of preparation suggests a long-term intelligence operation. Marcus sat down heavily in a chair. So we're dealing with a species that has been watching us for an extended period, has technology we don't understand, and has military capabilities sophisticated enough to penetrate our border defenses. That's how it looks, Roy said. Patricia turned back to the metallurgy data. There was something about the ship's construction that nagged at her. The materials were so basic, so primitive by Imperial standards, but they were used with an efficiency that was almost elegant. It was like someone had taken the simplest possible approach and perfected it. Marcus, I want to run some simulations. If this species has been developing independently, they might have found solutions to problems that we solve differently. Their technology might be primitive, but it could also be more robust than ours. What do you mean? Patricia pointed to the energy readings. Our ships use quantum crystals because they're efficient and powerful. But quantum crystals are also fragile and complex. If something goes wrong, the whole system fails. This ship's fusion system is crude, but it's also simple and reliable. It might be harder to disable or destroy. Roy looked up from his data with a new expression of concern. Patricia, are you suggesting that their primitive technology might actually be an advantage? I'm suggesting that we shouldn't assume primitive means inferior. Different doesn't always mean worse. Marcus stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the capital city. The lights of millions of buildings stretched to the horizon, a testament to the Empire's power and prosperity. We need more information. One ship could be an anomaly, a scout from a small civilization testing our defenses. But if there are more of them, then we need to be prepared, Roy finished. Patricia gathered the data files she had been studying. I'm going to take this back to my lab and run every analysis I can think of. Marcus, I need access to the restricted archives. If there are any records of similar technology or unusual materials, I want to see them. Done, Marcus said. As Patricia prepared to leave, Roy called out to her. Patricia, when you're running your analysis, consider one more possibility. What's that? Roy's expression was grim. What if this isn't their most advanced ship? What if this was just their equivalent of a probe, and their real military vessels are much more sophisticated? Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. She had been thinking of the unknown ship as a technological curiosity, a puzzle to be solved. But Roy was right. If this crude-looking vessel was capable of penetrating Imperial defenses and conducting reconnaissance missions with impunity, what could their advanced ships do? She left Central Command with more questions than answers. As her transport carried her back to her laboratory, Patricia looked up at the stars and wondered what else might be out there, watching the Empire from the darkness. For the first time in her career, she felt like they were the ones being studied, cataloged, and evaluated. The unknown ship had treated their defenses like they were made of paper. It had scanned their most secret installations like it had every right to do so. And somewhere in the vast darkness of space, someone was analyzing that data and planning their next move. Patricia had always believed that the Empire was the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but as she began her analysis of the impossible ship, she started to wonder if they had simply been alone in their corner of space, mistaking isolation for superiority. The universe, it seemed, was much larger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Colonel Amy Foster had been expecting trouble for 3 months. Ever since the incident at the border station, the Empire had been reinforcing its outer defenses. More ships, more sensors, more weapons. Amy now commanded a force that could stop any known threat in the galaxy. She just hoped it would be enough for whatever was coming. The reinforced border station was a fortress now. Where there had been one surveillance post, there were now 3 heavily armed platforms connected by energy shields. The fighter squadrons had been tripled, and the defensive weapon arrays could destroy entire fleets. Amy had never seen so much firepower concentrated in one place. She was reviewing the morning patrol reports when her sensor officer called out. Lieutenant Ben Parker was older than most sensor operators, a veteran who had been watching space for 15 years. When Ben got excited, everyone paid attention. Colonel Foster, I'm picking up multiple contacts at the edge of sensor range. They just appeared out of nowhere. Amy moved to Ben's station immediately. The sensor display showed contacts, lots of them, scattered across a wide area of space. As she watched, more appeared, materializing out of empty space like ghosts becoming real. How many? Amy asked. Ben was counting rapidly, his fingers moving across his controls. 37 contacts so far, Colonel. No, wait, more are appearing. 42, 46, 51. Amy felt her stomach drop. 50 ships was a major fleet action. The Empire hadn't seen a fleet that size in hostile territory for over a century. Are they the same design as the ship from 3 months ago? Yes, ma'am. Same energy signatures, same hull configurations, but these are bigger and there are different types. Some look like the original Scout, but others are much larger. Amy activated the station's emergency protocols. Alarms began sounding throughout the base, and defensive systems came online. The reinforced platforms turned to face the approaching fleet, their weapons charging and targeting systems activating. Send a message to Admiral Brooks. Tell him the unknown ships have returned in force. Request immediate reinforcement. While Ben transmitted the message, Amy studied the approaching fleet. The ships were moving in formation, maintaining precise distances and coordinated movement. This wasn't a random collection of vessels. This was an organized military force with experienced commanders. Colonel, Ben said, Admiral Brooks is responding. He's dispatching Battle Group 7 to intercept. They'll be here in 2 hours. Amy nodded, but she was watching the unknown fleet with growing concern. The ships were moving slowly, almost casually, as if they had all the time in the world. They showed no signs of urgency or concern about the defensive preparations they were certainly detecting. Ben, are they scanning us? Yes, ma'am, but not like before. This time they're doing something different. It looks like they're analyzing our defensive improvements, studying the changes we made since their last visit. The implications of that statement hit Amy like a physical blow. The unknown ships weren't just back to continue their reconnaissance. They were studying the Empire's response to their previous visit. They were learning how the Empire adapted to threats. Colonel Foster, a new voice called out. Lieutenant Sarah Kim was manning the communication station. I'm receiving a transmission from the unknown fleet. Amy felt her heart rate increase. Put it through. The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything Amy had ever heard. It was definitely an alien voice, but it spoke perfect Imperial standard. The tone was calm, almost conversational, as if the speaker was discussing the weather rather than commanding a hostile fleet. Imperial Forces, this is Fleet Commander Paul Anderson of the Human Colonial Navy. We are conducting a scheduled survey of this sector. We advise you to maintain safe distance from our vessels during operations. Amy stared at the communication panel. The alien had identified himself with a name that sounded almost familiar, and he had called his people humans, but more disturbing was his casual tone. He was talking like he belonged here and the Imperial forces were the ones who needed to be careful. Sarah, open a channel. Channel open, Colonel. Amy took a deep breath. Fleet Commander Anderson, this is Colonel Amy Foster of the Zephyrian Imperial Defense Force. You are in violation of Imperial space. You must identify yourselves and state your intentions immediately. There was a pause before the human commander responded. When he did, there was something that might have been amusement in his voice. Colonel Foster, we appreciate your concern, but we are operating under Colonial Survey Authority. We have no hostile intentions toward Imperial personnel at this time. Please maintain safe distance while we complete our survey. Amy felt anger building in her chest. The human was talking to her like she was a minor obstacle, something to be managed rather than respected. Commander Anderson, you will withdraw from Imperial space immediately or face the consequences. This time the pause was longer. When Anderson spoke again, his tone had changed slightly. It was still calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that made Amy's skin crawl. Colonel, I need you to understand something. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to complete a survey. Your ships can maintain safe distance, or they can be moved to safe distance. The choice is yours. Amy looked around her command center. Her officers were staring at her, waiting for orders. The most powerful defensive force in Imperial space was under her command, and some alien was talking to her like she was powerless. To stop him. All stations, battle positions, prepare for combat. The defensive platforms powered up their main weapons. Fighter squadrons launched from the station's bays. The energy shields between the platforms brightened as power was diverted to defensive systems. Amy had never felt more ready for a fight. Ben, what are the humans doing? Ben studied his sensors with a puzzled expression. Nothing, Colonel. They're just holding position and continuing their scans. They don't seem concerned about our battle preparations at all. Amy was about to respond when Admiral Brooks appeared on the main communication screen. He looked older than she remembered, and there were lines of stress around his eyes. "Colonel Foster, what's the situation?" "Sir, we have 51 hostile vessels in Imperial space. They're conducting what they call a survey and they're refusing to withdraw. I've ordered battle stations." Brooks studied the tactical display that showed both the Imperial and human positions. "Colonel, Battle Group 7 is 30 minutes out. Can you hold position until they arrive?" "Yes, sir. The defensive platforms can handle anything those ships can throw at us." Brooks nodded, but Amy could see doubt in his expression. "Colonel, I want you to be very careful. We still don't understand their technology or their capabilities." Before Amy could respond, Ben called out from his station. "Colonel, Battle Group 7 is dropping out of hyperspace. They're moving to intercept the human fleet." Amy watched as 12 of the Empire's most advanced warships emerged from hyperspace and began moving toward the human fleet. Each ship was a masterpiece of Imperial engineering, armed with quantum cannon and protected by shields that could stop anything in the known galaxy. The human response was immediate and devastating. Amy watched in horror as the human ships moved, with a speed and coordination that defied everything she knew about space combat. They didn't fight like any enemy she had studied. They fought like they had been doing this for a very long time. The Imperial ships opened fire first, their quantum cannon sending beams of pure energy across space. The beams struck the human ships, but instead of the expected explosions, the energy seemed to scatter harmlessly across their hulls. The human response was unlike anything in Amy's experience. Instead of returning fire with similar weapons, they did something that made no tactical sense. 3 of their ships accelerated directly toward the Imperial formation, while others began firing what looked like primitive projectile weapons. "Ben, what are they shooting at us?" Ben was staring at his instruments in confusion. "Colonel, those aren't energy weapons. They're firing some kind of metal projectiles, but they're moving at impossible speeds." Amy watched as the Imperial flagship, the pride of Battle Group 7, was struck by a salvo of the metal projectiles. The ship's shields, designed to stop energy weapons and particle beams, offered no protection against chunks of metal moving at significant fractions of light speed. The flagship exploded. Amy felt the blood drain from her face. The Imperial Navy's most advanced ship had just been destroyed by weapons that looked like something from a museum. How is that possible? Ben was frantically checking his readings. "Colonel, the projectiles aren't just metal. They're some kind of dense matter accelerated to tremendous speeds. Our shields can't stop solid objects moving that fast." The battle continued, but it wasn't really a battle anymore. It was a demonstration. The human ships moved through the Imperial formation like they were dancing, avoiding return fire with movements that seemed impossible for vessels their size. They used their own damaged ships as weapons, ramming them into Imperial vessels. They coordinated attacks across impossible distances, striking multiple targets simultaneously. In less than 20 minutes, Battle Group 7 was destroyed. Fleet Admiral Carol Bennett had not slept in 3 days. The reports coming in from across the Empire were all the same. Human ships appearing, scanning, fighting when confronted, and winning every battle. The Imperial Navy, which had ruled the galaxy for 2,000 years, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to treat warfare like a science experiment. Carol sat in her command center deep beneath the Imperial capital, surrounded by screens showing the locations of human fleets across the Empire. Red dots marked where battles had been fought. There were no green dots marking Imperial victories. There were only red dots and empty spaces where Imperial fleets used to be. "Admiral Bennett," called out Commander Dan Williams from the communications station. "We're intercepting more human transmissions. The encryption is getting easier to break." Carol looked up from the tactical display that showed the steady advance of human forces toward the heart of the Empire. "What are they saying?" Dan activated the speakers, and the command center filled with voices speaking in the strange human language. The translation system had been working on their communications for weeks, and it was finally starting to make sense of their words. 7th Survey Fleet to Colonial Command. Sector 12. Alpha cleared and catalogued. Minimal resistance encountered. Moving to next sector as scheduled. Carol felt a chill run down her spine. The humans were talking about clearing sectors like they were cleaning rooms in a house. They mentioned minimal resistance when describing battles that had cost the Empire dozens of ships and thousands of lives. "Is there more?" Carol asked. Dan nodded and played another transmission. This one was between two human ship commanders, and their casual tone made Carol's blood run cold. Captain Turner to Captain Lewis. "How did your encounter with the crystal ships go?" "Pretty standard, Mike. They used the same tactics as the others. Heavy energy weapons, predictable formations. Once you get past their shields, they break apart easily. Any casualties on your end?" "Lost 2 fighters and had some hull damage on the Portland. Nothing serious. How about your sector?" "Similar story. These Imperial ships are impressive looking, but they fight like they've never seen real combat before. It's like they learned everything from textbooks." Carol stood up from her chair. The humans were discussing the destruction of Imperial fleets like they were comparing notes from a training exercise. They talked about the Empire's most advanced warships like they were outdated museum pieces. "Dan, are there any references to their command structure or their home base?" Dan worked at his console for several minutes before finding what Carol was looking for. "Yes, ma'am. Here's a transmission from one of their fleet commanders to something called Colonial Command." The voice that came through the speakers was different from the others. It had the authority of someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Admiral Jackson to Colonial Command. Survey operations proceeding on schedule. Local resistance has been lighter than expected. Request permission to accelerate timeline for Phase 2 operations." A different voice responded, older and more formal. "Permission granted, Admiral. Phase 2 assets are being deployed to your sector. Expect reinforcement fleets within 10 standard days." Carol felt her legs give out, and she sat down heavily in her chair. Phase 2 operations. Reinforcement fleets. The humans weren't just surveying the Empire. They were preparing for something much larger. "Dan, I need you to find any references to their technology or their history. I need to understand what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Dan played transmission after transmission. Carol listened with growing horror as the humans casually discussed technologies and conflicts that dwarfed anything in Imperial history. "Remember the Covenant War?" one human pilot was saying to another. "These crystal ships remind me of the Sangheili cruisers, but without the plasma weaponry." "Yeah, but at least the Covenant fought back properly. These Imperials just line up and wait to be shot." Carol had never heard of any Covenant War, but the way the humans talked about it suggested a conflict on a galactic scale. They mentioned plasma weaponry like it was something they encountered regularly. Another transmission mentioned something called the Synthetic Uprising, where humans had apparently fought against artificial intelligences that had taken over entire star systems. The humans speaking about it sounded bored, like it was ancient history, but it was the references to their home territory that truly terrified Carol. The humans spoke casually about the Sol Defense Grid, the Outer Colony rebellions, and something called the Inner Colony Fleet. They talked about hundreds of worlds, thousands of ships, and military conflicts that spanned decades. Dr. Patricia Hayes entered the command center carrying a datapad filled with her latest analysis. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with the terrible clarity that came from understanding something awful. "Carol, I've been analyzing the human communications and cross-referencing them with their combat performance. I think I know what we're dealing with." Carol looked up at her old friend. Patricia had been the Empire's leading expert on alien civilizations for 30 years. If anyone could make sense of the humans, it would be her. "Tell me, Patricia. I need to understand why we're losing so badly." Patricia sat down and activated a holographic display that showed the pattern of human expansion across the galaxy. "Carol, the humans aren't just another alien species. They're a species that has been at war for their entire recorded history." "What do you mean?" Patricia pointed to the display. "Look at their expansion pattern. They don't explore and then colonize. They survey, secure, and fortify. Every move they make is a military operation. Their entire civilization is organized around the assumption that any peace is temporary. Carol studied the display. The human advance was methodical, professional, and utterly without mercy. They moved through Imperial space like they had done this 1,000 times before. Patricia, are you saying they're a warrior species? No, Carol, I'm saying they're something much worse. They're a species that has survived wars we can't even imagine. Listen to this. Patricia activated a recording she had isolated from the human transmissions. A human commander was giving orders to his subordinates, and his casual tone while discussing massive destruction was chilling. Colonel Martinez, take your battle group and clear the industrial systems in Sector 5. Standard protocol, disable their manufacturing capability, catalog their resources, and prepare for colonial administration takeover. Yes, sir. What about civilian populations? Standard relocation procedures. Anyone who cooperates gets moved to designated zones. Anyone who resists gets processed through military courts. Patricia stopped the recording. Carol, they have standard protocols for conquering civilizations. They have procedures for dealing with civilian populations. They talk about military courts like they're a normal part of government. Carol felt sick to her stomach. How many civilizations have they conquered? Based on their communications, dozens at least, maybe hundreds. They reference wars against something called the Forerunner Remnants, conflicts with the Prothean successor states, and campaigns against the Reaper cults. None of these names appear in any of our historical records. The implications hit Carol like a physical blow. The Empire had always believed they were the dominant civilization in the galaxy. They had contact with dozens of other species, all of whom acknowledged Imperial superiority. But the humans were talking about conflicts and civilizations that the Empire had never even heard of. Patricia, are you telling me that there's an entire part of the galaxy we know nothing about? I'm telling you that the humans come from a part of space where civilizations like ours are common, and where wars between them are routine. We've been living in isolation, thinking we were the center of the galaxy. But we're just one small empire in a much larger and more dangerous universe. Carol stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the Imperial capital. Millions of people lived in the city below, going about their daily lives, unaware that their entire world was about to change forever. What do the humans want, Patricia? Patricia consulted her data pad. Based on their communications, they want to expand their territory. They're looking for suitable worlds for colonization and resources for their industry. The Empire controls systems they want, so they're taking them. And if we resist? Patricia's expression was grim. Then they'll treat us like they've treated every other civilization that resisted them. They'll destroy our military, occupy our worlds, and integrate our territory into their colonial administration. Carol turned away from the window. How long do we have? Based on their current rate of advance, they'll reach the core systems within 6 months. But Carol, I don't think time is going to help us. Every battle we fight teaches them more about our capabilities while revealing nothing about theirs. Carol looked at the tactical display showing human forces spread across half the Empire. Each red dot represented a fleet that had easily defeated everything the Empire could send against it. The humans were winning not because they were stronger, but because they were better at warfare than anyone the Empire had ever encountered. Patricia, in your professional opinion, do we have any chance of defeating them? Emperor Valdris III had ruled the galaxy's greatest empire for 40 years. He had never known defeat, never faced a challenge he could not overcome, never encountered an enemy he could not crush or negotiate with. Today, as he stood in his throne room looking at the tactical displays showing human ships surrounding his capital system, he realized that his reign was over. The humans had moved faster than anyone thought possible. In just 3 months, they had swept through the Empire's outer territories, defeated every fleet sent against them, and now they controlled more than half of Imperial space. The speed of their advance was matched only by the efficiency of their conquest. Captain Linda Ross stood on the bridge of the human flagship Endurance, watching the Imperial capital world grow larger on her screens. She had been fighting wars for most of her adult life, and she had seen the fall of dozens of civilizations. This one was no different from the others, except perhaps that it had taken longer to realize it was beaten. Captain Ross called out her communications officer Lieutenant John Clark. We're receiving a transmission from the Imperial Palace. Emperor Valdris is requesting a meeting. Linda almost smiled. They always wanted to negotiate at the end, as if there was still something to discuss. Put him through, John. The main screen, filled with the image of an elderly alien with the kind of bearing that came from a lifetime of absolute power. Emperor Valdris looked exactly like what he was, a ruler who had never been told no by anyone in his entire life. Captain Ross, I am Emperor Valdris III, sovereign ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. I wish to discuss terms for ending this conflict. Linda studied the alien emperor for a moment. He was trying to project authority, but she could see the fear in his eyes. She had seen that same fear in the eyes of dozens of other rulers whose empires had fallen to human expansion. Your Majesty, there is no conflict to end. Colonial survey operations in this sector are nearly complete. What you call your empire has been designated for integration into the human colonial administration. Valdris straightened in his throne, drawing on 4 decades of imperial dignity. Captain, surely we can reach some accommodation. The Empire has resources that would be valuable to your people. We can establish trade agreements, mutual defense treaties. Linda had heard variations of this speech from every defeated ruler she had ever faced. They all thought they had something to offer. Something that would make the humans change their minds about conquest and colonization. Your Majesty, integration is not a negotiation. It's an administrative process. Your worlds, your resources, and your population are now part of human space. The only choice you have is how that integration takes place. Valdris leaned forward on his throne. What do you mean? Linda activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the former empire. Red areas showed territories under human control, yellow areas showed territories currently being secured, and a small green area around the capital system showed what remained of imperial authority. Your Majesty, you can choose cooperative integration or enforced integration. Under cooperative integration, your government continues to exist under human oversight. Your people keep their current social structures, and the transition is managed gradually. Under enforced integration, your government is dissolved, your military is disbanded, and your population is relocated according to colonial requirements. Valdris stared at the display showing his empire carved up into administrative zones. And if I refuse both options? Linda's expression didn't change. Then you choose extinction, and we proceed with enforced integration anyway. The blunt statement hit Valdris like a physical blow. In 40 years of rule, no one had ever spoken to him with such casual dismissal of his authority. But as he looked at the human captain's face, he realized she wasn't being deliberately cruel or insulting. She was simply stating facts. Captain, Ross, surely your leaders would be interested in a peaceful solution. The Empire has stood for 2,000 years. We have knowledge, technology, cultural achievements that would be lost if you simply destroy us. Linda nodded thoughtfully. Your cultural data has already been cataloged by our survey teams. Anything of scientific or historical value will be preserved in colonial archives. As for your technology, our engineers have determined that your quantum crystal power systems could be useful for certain applications, though they're inferior to our current fusion designs. Valdris felt the blood drain from his face. The humans had already cataloged his civilization's achievements and found them wanting. They spoke about preserving Zephyrian culture the way he might speak about preserving artifacts in a museum. Long do I have to decide? Valdris asked quietly. Integration operations begin in 72 hours regardless of your decision. Cooperative integration requires your formal surrender and public statement supporting the transition. If we don't receive that within 72 hours, we proceed with enforced integration. Valdris looked around his throne room, at the symbols of imperial power that had meant everything to him just hours ago. The golden throne, the crystal pillars, the holographic displays showing an empire that no longer existed. All of it was meaningless now. Captain, may I ask you something? Go ahead, Your Majesty. How many civilizations like mine have you conquered? Linda was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was matter-of-fact. The colonial administration has integrated 47 major civilizations in the past century. Yours is number 48. Most chose cooperative integration once they understood their situation. Valdris closed his eyes. 47 civilizations. 47 empires like his, each one thinking they were unique and powerful, each one discovering they were just another entry in a human database. What happens to me? He asked. Under cooperative integration, you remain as planetary governor of your homeworld under colonial oversight. Under enforced integration, you and your government are processed through military tribunals. The outcomes vary depending on individual circumstances. Valdris understood. Cooperation meant a comfortable retirement as a figurehead ruler with no real power. Resistance meant a military trial that could end in imprisonment or execution. 3 hours later, Emperor Valdris III appeared on every communication screen in what remained of his empire. He looked older than his 70 years, but his voice was steady as he read the statement that officially ended 2,000 years of Zephyrian imperial rule. Citizens of the Empire, I speak to you today to announce that our sovereignty has ended. After careful consideration of our circumstances, I have accepted integration into the human colonial administration. Effective immediately, all imperial military forces will stand down and prepare for decommissioning. All civilian authorities will cooperate with incoming colonial officials to ensure a smooth transition. Valdris paused, looking directly into the camera. I want you to understand that this decision was not made from weakness or cowardice, but from recognition of reality. The humans are not conquerors in the traditional sense. They are administrators of a galactic civilization that we never knew existed. Resistance would only bring suffering to our people with no hope of victory. As Valdris finished his speech, Captain Linda Ross watched from her ship's bridge. She had heard similar speeches 47 times before, and she would probably hear them many more times as human expansion continued across the galaxy. John, she said to her communications officer, send a message to Colonial Command. Integration of Sector 12 complete. Ready for next assignment. Yes, ma'am. Any special notes for the report? Linda looked at the peaceful planet below where millions of beings were just beginning to understand that their world had changed forever. Standard integration. Local government chose cooperation. No significant military resistance. Population appears adaptable to colonial administration. It was the same report she had filed 47 times before. Another civilization had learned that the galaxy was much larger and more dangerous than they had imagined. Another species had discovered that their achievements, their culture, and their history were just small parts of a much bigger story. Major Tony Clark, commanding the human ground forces preparing to land on the Imperial capital, reviewed the integration protocols one more time. He had done this before on dozens of worlds, and the process was always the same. Secure government buildings, catalog resources, establish communication with the local population, and begin the gradual process of incorporating another world into the vast network of human colonial space. As the transport ships descended toward the Imperial capital, Tony looked out at the city below. It was beautiful in its own way, with crystal spires and flowing architecture that spoke of a civilization that had known peace and prosperity for centuries. Soon it would be just another colonial city, its unique character preserved in archives while its people adapted to life under human rule. The Zephyrian Empire had believed they were the masters of their corner of the galaxy. They had ruled with absolute authority over dozens of worlds and billions of people, but they had been isolated alone in their space, mistaking the absence of challengers for proof of their supremacy. The humans had shown them the truth. There was no corner of the galaxy isolated enough to hide from the steady expansion of human colonial space.